results will really not stop people from partying to you, complaining, and destroying your work or just your dreams. I'll give you this. We always learn that once you have results, people will actually listen to you. To be honest, I also believe that, but not really. What's happening in the US now with someone called Elon Musk? He's being called stupid, incompetent, not knowledgeable. Anyway, all the names you can imagine. But a few years ago, he was a hero from the left and the right because he was able to fly. He had Tesla, and now we are looking at look. We're looking at things like this: Tesla dealerships being bombed, being destroyed. And again, we had former vice president candidate, you know, saying that that was okay. How can we really, how can we really call ourselves anything but just lost? And this is really important. And I'm going to say this because it is really time for all of us to come to the conversation. What is Doge doing? What is everybody complaining so much about President Trump, new tariffs, President Trump's new policies? What is democracy? First of all, he ran on it and he's doing it. The only thing we can complain is that in the past, people we voted for didn't do the same. That's really the only plausible explanation or complaint. Is the Democratic Party dead? I believe so, honestly. And I worked for Kerry. I worked in Kerry's campaign, Robert Reich, great professor of mine. And I fell trap into some of this stupidity. From the last few years, it became really evident that something had to be done. And there's something we need to look at. And I'm an economist, and I can tell you something. There's a lot of things we know do not work. For example, mass inflation. I've lived in Brazil. I grew up in Brazil, and I'm in São Paulo today, and we are probably one of the best cases. Brazil, Argentina, but we also had Greece in the 2000s. But Brazil in the 80s and 90s, we had hyperinflation. The same thing happened in Argentina, what's happening right now in Venezuela. We know a lot about how inflation will destroy an economy. We know a lot about printing money, public deficits, debt, how that affects you in your house, your mortgage, your credit cards, how much you can borrow, companies, everything. We know that. We have a lot of data around, for example, bureaucracy. Brazil is extremely bureaucratic, and that is something the regulatory red tape has never been good. And clearly, and you see states like Florida and California and Texas, for example, there's a disparity in growth and how you can do business. So that's something we know. What's President Trump doing? It's complex to understand because there's a lot of things that have not been tried together. But I'll tell you something. If your house was borrowing, like there's not going to be a tomorrow. You're just maxing your credit card. You're buying things you don't need. You're buying from your neighbors and you own that money, right? But when you try to sell to your neighbors, they really don't let you do it. That would not work. So to you and me, I would be careful to fall into the trap of the media. Because, yes, the stock market fell and it got hit. But why? I'll put a graph that just shows how much wealth has been built for the past 20 to 30, 40 years in the US. And free trade is exceptional in doing that. But the problem, the real problem is that has been skewed to just a few. It's very important, and I would advise all of Wall Street to think of this as a correction, because it has been an amazing 30 to 40 years for Wall Street, but not for Main Street. And we all know this. A lot of people are suffering. All these jobs, the blue collar, well paid jobs, have moved to China, have moved to Mexico, to Turkey, to Brazil, in some cases, very, very small. And the reality is the fabric of what is America, it's at stake. And myself, I went to school, I lived for years in the US, and I believe a strong US, it's good for the world. Brazil is going through a very difficult time. We're a young democracy. I wouldn't call ourselves a real democracy right at this point. So the example that the US can give into the world and this reshape of the way we do business. Because when we look at America or Europe or Brazil, it's not a unified thing. And in an economy, there's a lot of actors. It's like your house. In your house, you have a big family, and each one has their particular taste, their particular interest, their desires. So a country, it's all of this together. So when you look at some industry in the US, for example, the defense industry, it has exploded, tech, but there's a lot of industries that create jobs, that have high-paid jobs, or even education that has not been given to the people. There's a lot of money thrown into education, but the results have not been that good. The US, it's really downhill as far as education results. So if that continues, what's going to happen? That amazing story that started in 1776, let's put it this way, a birth of a new democracy, a new way of organizing societies. And we're still searching for the perfect union. And I always look at this with the three pillars. There's this idea that I would call Israel. And why would I call Israel? Because that was a promise given by God to Abraham. And Israel is not just a state as we know it today or in the Bible, but rather an idea of a perfect amalgamation of people. And then you have the US that in 1776 tried to become a different source of democracy, not of a king, not of a tyrant, but rather individuals with protected rights, individuals that together, since they had the same goal, the same principles, Judeo-Christian principles, we would take this and make America become a city upon the hill. The real export of the US has been democracy. And when I say from the US, I mean from the ideal of the forefathers and the ideal that is behind the US. Of course, companies are not part of that because they have done very similar, let's say, colonialism as France, Germany did, or even the UK. So let's break it out, what the US really means. What is really the United States? Because that ideal, it's something that we have to aspire to. And it is positive that people are trying to bring that ideal back. So when you have a Department of Education that is not really something that was in the There was not something meant to be there. There's some advantage, but clearly not really. That has not developed. So when we look into the American Revolution, and I would call American Revolution 2.0, it is time for all of us to rethink democracy, not trying to censor people as it is happening in Europe and it's happened in Brazil. I can show you another video. Look, what is this? This is UK parents being arrested because they had they had complained or they've talked about something in really in a WhatsApp chat. So democracy, it's really not going well. What JD Vance talked about Europe, and the same thing is true for Brazil. And every time I'm going to talk about this, my wife always tell me, be careful, because we're not really trying to we're not really trying to bring anything bad. There's a lot of people already complaining and criticizing. What I'm looking at is that we all need to find common grounds. We need to bring that back. And for the US, it's an amazing time, and the world is looking at this in a different way. Yes, as an economist, I understand tariffs could bring some short term pain and even long term. We don't know. It has been tested as much as any all the other things we discussed. For example, hyperinflation, inflation, a lot of government debt, a lot of government spending. So when we look at this, and you as a Democrat do not want your money to be spent in waste, fraud, or abuse, it is time, first of all, to let President Trump test his waters. He got elected in a landslide to do just that. And there's a political price, and that's called the midterms. If all that he's trying to do not work, because it could have some negative effects. But the fact of the matter is we need to find a different path. That is impossible for the US or for any country on that matter to be spending with a $2 trillion deficit. And to be honest, stop listening to mainstream media and start looking for your own information. It is amazing that now people are getting educated about what really is the impacts of policy, the impact of the government, the impact of governance, of bad governance. So it is time for us to look to the future, to look into something good. We are living in the most prosperous, the most exciting, the most peaceful time in history, in human history. But we don't feel like that because we are always complaining. We're always looking into the dark side of things. So, yes, we need to make a case for democracy, for real democracy. We need to protect speech. We need to protect minorities, which has always been the ideal behind the American Revolution, the American system of governance. But lies, it's enough lies. Let's stop. Let's all search for the truth. And in the midterms or in any of other elections, let's participate. But let's really be cognizant of what we're looking for. This happened. This happened today, okay, in São Paulo. Um, this is really happening as we speak. And obviously, this was early today. Okay. This was early today. And I'm in São Paulo. This is Avenida Paulista. And hundreds, millions of people, I'm not sure how many people were there, but they were protesting for, they're asking for amnesty for the people that were arrested on January 8th in Brazil. President Bolsonaro will very likely to be arrested soon for really no reason. And to be honest with you, as someone who, lived in America for a while, probably always understood the powerful, the importance of free speech, something that is honestly sad for me to say, because speech is protected in Brazilian Constitution. And I'm not sure what's going to happen, but when you have people that have been condemned for 14 years for writing on a statue with a lipstick, a phrase that was said by a justice in the Supreme Court, that is not what anyone had in mind for what we call Brazil. And an image like this is powerful. But a video showing so many people there, this video could be censored. Someone could, in fact, put me in some sort of case, like Elon Musk is being sued in this, it's called a lawsuit of the end of the world, because it has been going on for like a few years. There's a lot of things happening in Brazil. And my hope is that we all can come together. It's really not calling just for amnesty for people that have been wrongly accused, not the people that broke into the Congress or into the palaces and destroyed property. That has to be the case. Those people can be and should be held accountable, as long as everyone else from the left, every time they do this, the MST, and there's a lot of examples from the past decade, and no one has ever been accused, arrested, or even fined. So giving 15, 14 years to someone who wrote on a lipstick on a statue, and you freeing drug dealers or complaining about people that have been arrested and in the US sent back to Brazil because they were in the handcuffs, that's not the Brazil we all want. We would like to be a city upon the hill, a source for a third pillar of the one I talked about, the US and Israel. Because for whatever reason, we are able to bring people together. We have Arabs and Jews living side by side. We are less niched like you have in the US. You have the Japanese here, the Chinese, the Indians. We kind of mix, really. Everybody, if you go on a night out in São Paulo, you're gonna see that powerful culture that is part international but part Brazilian. And anyone who has never been to Brazil should come, and anyone who came once will understand what I'm talking about. It's just hard to explain. We accept, we make sure people are really well received. And the fact of the matter is, it is time for all of us to look for a new time. I would like to congratulate everyone that believes in something. And we need to look at those people that are complaining about Tesla or about Elon Musk, and they're just misguided. We need to put the truth out. The more we bring the truth out, the better. It's sad when you have people defending Hamas. And I was talking to a friend recently. I was in the U.S. At Harvard Yard. I was going through Harvard Yard a few days before October 7th, October 7th, 6th. Few days, and I arrived back in Brazil on the day, on the next day of the attack. So I had been flying, and I just got the news of the terrible attack in Israel when I landed in Brazil, like 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. And it was sad to see a couple of days later a student being beaten by Hamas supporters in Harvard Yard. And that was a scene that I thought I would never see, because the idea behind higher education and the studies I did at Harvard, for example, everybody that went through there, the former presidents, the former Nobel Prize winners, the former fighters, and people that love the idea of democracy, that love the idea of the U.S., this idea that is, I can feel my bones when I walk through Boston, the Freedom Trail, the Tea Party, all that history. That city is very dear to my heart. But having seen a scene like that, it saddens me, because I thought that would never happen. But we also learn that we need to be careful with democracy, and we need to make sure our institutions are strong. And the better our media, social media, and people like you and I having a conversation, the better results we're going to have. The future of the world is bright. I believe that. Let's judge people on their character, not on their skin. Let President Trump do the policies he has been elected to do. And yes, it could be bad. And if there's a bad thing, he might lose the midterms elections. And then that's the democracy that was created. I do agree we need to update the idea of the institutions, but we can never forget that freedom of speech and freedom of assembly is necessary. And we all need to be able to have moral clarity that someone who supports a terrorist group and that had more than 10 years, since 2005, could build a beautiful country for their counterparts, but rather they create tunnels and bought weapons to destroy their neighbors. There's no excuse. There needs to be moral clarity. That's it. We need to accept people. We need to love people as a Christians. That's the basic thing. But we cannot just let things like this happen. And I'm sure some people will be deported because they were illegally in the U.S. And I know some people that stay in Boston for so many years. You go to a restaurant, you go to a store, you hire someone to go to clean your house. I mean, a lot of these people, we know that, and some I call even them friends. But the fact of the matter is, President Biden and the previous administration did a disservice to these people as well. People that have been in the U.S. I know some that have been there since I went to college in 98, in 96. So a long time. And some of them have not been able to acquire documentation because, there's only a few pathways to do that. So to those, it's unfortunate. And it's one of those things that collateral, but we should not, anyone, really question why the US might not want criminals or people that just ran over their borders into their midst, people that have committed crimes. And, I understand that. For me, it's very simple. There's a lot of miscommunication. Just a couple of days ago, I saw an article in a very prestigious newspaper, magazines in Brazil, just distorting what has been published in the US as far as Doge works. And it is really time for us. When I say us, I'm not talking about the politicians. I talk you and me. You who you're in your house, your family, doesn't matter you come from, where you're listening to this video, we need to take charge. There's time for change. And what is this change about? Just let's change the way we look at things. Let's not wait. Let's get educated. So when we get educated about these things, for example, how the government works, how laws are come about, we're going to have more say on your day-to-day life. The only thing we need to do is take care of our families, of the people immediately around us, and everything will work out. It is an amazing time. Don't get discouraged. Don't get boggled down by this stupidity talking on TV. So God bless us all. God bless America, Brazil. And you're very lucky to live in a country that has been able to attract millions of people and people that are committed, and someone like Elon Musk, who is in fact doing his duty. A duty is something you do doesn't matter if you're getting accolades or if you're being hurt. Take care.